So the girdles, as we begin, are the parts that attach our limbs to the axial skeleton. So when we have our axial skeleton, that was the skull, the vertebrae, as well as the ribs, and then the sternum. Oh, I forgot to show you. I found a sternum that was in one of the boxes. So this is the sternum. You can see it's actually somewhat curved, and you can see the notches on the side of the body of the sternum that the ribs would then attach to. And this is the manubrium. This particular sternum xiphoid process is broken off. So I meant to show that to you. So the girdles are then attaching your limbs to the axial skeletons. They're part of the appendicular skeleton, but I'll teach them as as we come out of the axial skeleton. My hope today is to do the pectoral girdle, the upper body's girdle, as well as the lower body. And that may require us to skip down our notes, because I usually do pectoral girdle and then I think the arm. But I think it is easier to learn the limbs if we do arms and legs together. So my plan today is just to do the girdles together. So let me grab some of my parts here. So we'll get here. Let me open up, do the share screen, and we'll check out, share what we've got. And then as usual, please feel free to shout out if you can't hear me. Oh, let me stop sharing, hold on. There was a button that I can push and I'm sharing that's supposed to make the audio better. So I have to make sure there it is. Okay, hopefully you're seeing this. This is kind of our vertebrae one. We have the ribs. So let's pop up here. All right. I don't know why it went back there. I thought I clicked on it. Appendicular. Just double click on that. There we go. Appendicular skeleton. The plan for today, is to do part 1, our pectoral girdle, and then we're going to jump down to part 3 and do the pelvic girdle. That way, our lecture after this will be just the limbs together. There's enough, I think, parallels between the upper and lower that sometimes I think it's easier to point out those similarities and differences when they're taught together. So we're going to do the girdles. It's part 1 per pectoral girdle. So this here being the appendicular. So notice it's everything that's attached to the axial. So we have our pectoral girdle. That's going to be up here. That is how our upper extremity is attached to our axial skeleton. And then we have our pelvic girdle right here, which is obviously how our lower extremity is attached to our axial skeletal system. So as far as the pectoral girdle goes, it involves only 2 bones, the clavicle and the scapula. This is what the lab guide looks like. So you can see up here at the top, there is the clavicle bone, and we will have 2 features, pretty much the sternal end and the acromial end. And then when we go through the scapula, which is our shoulder blade, we have a lot more features that we're going to need to know. So let's go through this. I thought that list was at the end, so if not, we'll go back to that list. But this would be sort of, you could consider this on your lab guide, and this should be on Canvas, your sort of master list of what you want you'll need to know. It's not written in the right way. So for instance, if we're talking about this here sternal end, you would say, sternal end of the, in this case, right clavicle. I'll show you that right and left. So you want to put it in the proper format. This just gives you a nice bullet list so that you don't miss anything, or at least you know which ones you need to study. So as far as the pectoral girdle goes, we have the clavicle coming around the front, and then we have our triangular shoulder blades on the back. The clavicle, I think, is one of the 2 hardest to figure out right and left. So the clavicle, obviously it's going to be better in person, but let me show you this. We have the sternal end. I'm going to go do the stop share. You have this part of on your PowerPoint or in your notes, hopefully. So you can see this clavicle is just like real wiggly and S-shaped. So I want you to notice on this clavicle, we have a blunt end. It's almost like it's hitting a wall, like that's the flat blunt end right here. And then we have this other end that's tapered. It actually looks like someone took a hammer and smashed it flat. So it's more flat and wide, where this other one is just blunt, like you're just doing a stamp against a wall. The blunt stamp side is actually the sternal side. That is going to go to somewhere on here, like here, to the sternum. Where this flat, kind of wider, flat tapered side is known as the acromial end. And that one is ultimately going to, I have the wrong ones. Here we go, here's the right scapula. It's actually going to meet up with our scapula here. It's actually going to meet, which later, this is also the acromion. So these two will actually have similar names. So they will meet together, and they actually, this flat end is what you feel as the top bony part of your shoulder. So you can feel, so especially if you put your arm up, we feel muscle around it, that's our deltoid. But then the part that doesn't move up, like that you can feel, that is where the acromial end of the scapula meets up with the acromial end of the clavicle. So that's the top portion there. So right and left, I'll tell you about right and left, but I won't make you responsible for that because it's really, you can do it easier in person. It's just kind of tough on here. But how you are to do it is, see how it says S? You usually look at this thing, and this one is probably a female. So the bumps on it are more smooth. The male bones tend to have more nodularly bumps because they tend to have greater muscle strength, and so there's more vigorous attachments. Female bones tend to be smoother. So that's something also, if you're into forensics, that's kind of something to note. Maybe up close we can see, I don't know if it's all fuzzy. One side's smooth. This is the smooth side. I don't know if it's really showing you. And then this is more the rough side. When you're actually doing right and left, the rough side points down. And then we know this blunt side, the sternal end, is going to go to the middle. And so then the question is, oh, is it this way? Because it's flat, but I'll just lean forward. So, and then you think, no, that your neck wouldn't fit there. So in fact, this particular clavicle is going to be my right clavicle because it kind of bows forward. This the way this is. But again, it's super hard perspective because I'm looking at myself here in this video, and it's hard to be like, whoa, right and left and so on. So this one is, this and the fibula are the two that I think are the hardest for students. And so, but this is literally how, if I'm kind of lean forward, how it sits. So you have this wide flat end, and then you have the bump end. So this here, sternal end of the clavicle, acromial end of the clavicle. This particular one is going to be the right clavicle. Okay, back to the screen share. There we go. All right, there we go. Got that one. Now we're on to the scapula. The scapula is our shoulder blade. Okay, oops. Sorry, I'm doing the screen share. Yes, so we have to make sure it's optimized so I don't lose sound with you guys. So the scapula has a lot of features. Now, hopefully they're not too difficult. So I'm going to go through them on the screen here, and then we'll do it again with me holding the bone. I wonder if I have it animated. I don't. Okay. So the glenoid cavity, oops, sorry, my pen, glenoid cavity or fossa. A fossa is this shallow basin. Here we go. But it's also known as a cavity. It tends to be more flat, like a plate, than a true deep cavity. That's why either one of these terms, you can call it glenoid fossa, or you can call it the glenoid cavity, either one. But the main one is glenoid, and that is really the cup that your arm, so it's the cup part of the shoulder socket. The acromion, known as the acromion or acromial process, that's the one that the clavicle meets up with. So in this particular picture, it's going to be this higher one. If you're looking straight from the elbow, from the side arm, it's the higher one. In this case, it's the bigger one here. In this case, it's this portion here. So all of these are the acromion or acromial process. Those ones will meet up with the flat clavicular, the acromial process in the clavicle as the clavicle moves off. So that this here is the back half on the top of your shoulder, if you were to feel the top of your shoulder. Then the coracoid process is this smaller one. So I'll just put a C here, and this one's the coracoid process here. So it tends to be, and you can see this one kind of jutting up forward as a C. So this is our coracoid process. You can see it way better from this lateral view where, I don't know if you're into, my dad used to like to watch Star Trek. So if you're into the Starship Enterprise, it kind of looked like that, but the coracoid is on this side. So let me put this. This here is the acromion, and this one's the coracoid, and then this here is the glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa. Okay. Now, back to the acromion, we know that here is the end. That's the point of our shoulder that we can feel with our hand on the top of our shoulder. But what leads down from it, I'm just going to change colors. Here is as we come on down here, there, and then you can only see it in this picture, is known as the spine. So this is the spine of the scapula. The spine of the scapula ends in the acromion or acromial process at the wide end. So the spine, if you're, and I'll show you in a minute when I undo the screen share, is the part that you sort of like a handle that you're going to pick up the scapula if it's sitting there on the desk in front of you. Then we're going to go through, pick a new color. I'll just do this orange. I'm going to skip down here and do subscapular fossa. When we see the word sub, we're thinking it's going to be deep. So it is the whole underneath side of the scapula. So if you are, it's the part of the shoulder blade that's pushing, that's against the body. So the ribs are right under this subscapular fossa. And in this side, it's on this surface here. So it's the opposite side that the spine would be located. That's known as a subscapular fossa. And you can see the reason why it's known as a fossa is because it's slightly curved here. Again, like the glenoid fossa, it's not quite deep enough for a cavity. It's just a slightly curved portion because it's leaning right against the body. Then we'll go back to a different color to do all of these borders. So I'll just pick purple. Now I'll go back up here to the inferior angle. Inferior angle is pretty easy. It's this bottom point. There we go. Inferior angle. So it's the bottom point of your scapula. And then on either side, we have a medial border and a lateral border. So I'll just put a L. This is the lateral border, and this side is the medial border. The obviously lateral means out further away from the midline. So if this is where your arm is going to be headed down, there's our socket. Obviously, this is the lateral side. In this case, this is where the socket would be and your arm continues. So again, that's the lateral side. And then the medial is in here. That's towards your vertebral column. Okay, let's see what's on the next. So here's a picture. I don't know if I left this one in your notes or not. So it's got all the pieces, all the portions of it labeled for you, and you can find, there's so many really good sites online for learning the skeletal features. So so this is showing you, and I'll click off here in a minute to go through the features on a real bone. But I want you to see, here's that coracoid process. Here's our acromion process of the scapula. This is the acromial end of the clavicle, and you can see where those two would meet. That makes the top of your shoulder. This here is the head of the humerus, which is our arm bone. And you can see the white portion. This is the hyaline cartilage all through here. So any parts within a joint, and we're going to learn about this after we do the skeletal system, is joints, but any part that's actually articulating, meaning moving against each other, will be capped with hyaline cartilage. And so this is a really close-up view of our shoulder joint. So I'm going to go before here. I'll go back to here. Let me erase this giant mess. Erase all link, and then I will stop share, and then I'll pull out one of my scapula. So here's a scapula, number 7. So here we have it, and I want you to notice these things are so fragile, which is why we don't really use our real bones anymore in the classroom. We have plastic ones, but I can hold it up. You can kind of see how you can actually see through it, how thin the bone is. And so many of ours is actually broken. So here's one, and you can see holes in it because they're just wafer thin. So I'll show you the colored one in a moment after I show you this. So this here, when we have the scapula, the part, if it's laying down on the table, usually students lay it down. Let me get that clipboard. So if it's laying on the table, that's how it is. So a lot of times students will see it sitting like that. And I always tell students, okay, if you grab it, you're really grabbing it by the spine. And I often have them with their lab partner say, stick it onto their back, and then you can figure out if it's right or left. So let me turn around here, and then you can decide, is this one going to be a right or left scapula? So if we know the spine is going to be further away, and this part, see how smooth this surface is, that's the subscapular fossa. So that's going to be against the body. So the question is, does it go like this? Nope, that doesn't seem right. Or does it go like this? Let's rotate around here. And then you think, yeah, because this part here is where the arm's going to be, the arm socket. So it makes more sense that it is like that. So in this case, it's easier if you're a student, you're hanging on to it and you just plunk it onto your lab partner's back and go, yep, that ought to be the left one. And I have people during this is my favorite test to give in class. Well, the muscle one is too, because people are doing all kinds of moving and poking things and holding things up. So because it is not your right or left, but it's like this guy's right or left. So in this case, this here, because we know it goes like this, and I've had students do this in the middle of lab quizzes, are like holding it and they put it on, yep, that works. So this here is the left scapula, this particular one. And we can see that these guys are opposite. So the way you can see, well, I'm hanging on to the spine. So if I were to like plunk it onto like my screen of somebody's body, you can see that this would be the right and this here would be the left. So then we have the glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa. So you can see how shallow it is. We have the coracoid, which is the smaller one. The biceps muscle actually attaches to this one. This higher, larger one is the acromial process. Again, with the subscapular fossa. Then we have, obviously the spine is along here. Inferior angle is this bottom V. And then now, because we know this is the glenoid cavity, this whole area is our lateral border. I'll use a pen to sort of direct. So this would be our lateral border. And then this here is our medial border, because the medial border would be towards the media. Let me see if I can hold these on without breaking them and turn around. So we have it like this. So the medial border is going towards the vertebral column. Okay. Oh, I got Mr. Skeleton here too. So you can see it actually in place here. So we've got intact medial border, spine, spine. And then if I dip them forward, acromial process of the scapula, acromial process here of the clavicle coming forward to the, or acromial end to the sternal end of the clavicle. Inferior angle, medial border, lateral border. And on any of these skeletons, and you'll see it online too, these red color, the red and blue, you can see one side of my little skeleton man, it's not colored, this side is. It's letting you know of muscle attachments and origin and attachments. So they sort of determine, we'll deal with that when we do the muscle portion. Okay, on to the next part. Share. Okay. Okay, so we'll do the recap. So on our, do you know, this is our lab guide. You should be able to spot a sternal end and a acromial end of the clavicle. Because doing right and left on a clavicle on the computer is going to be too confusing, I won't require you to, but if you know it, it will be extra credit. So then on the scapula, yes, you definitely do have to know right or left. Even on the computer, that you definitely have to know because that one's not quite as bad. So we have two of them. It's known as the shoulder blades. So you should be able to spot the glenoid cavity. That's obviously the cup that's going to be our socket. The acromion, or you can call it the acromial process. That's the larger of the two. And in the lab guide, you know, I put these guys here. Whoops, why is my pen not working? These guys, so that you can label it yourself, you know. And then, so then we have our acromial process up here, our coracoid process, our glenoid cavity is going to be here. The spine is this portion. Inferior angle is the bottom point. We have the subscapular fossa, which is going to be this surface. You don't really see it as, there's not a picture where I have it face the other way. And then we have the medial border here and our lateral border there. Okay, what's next? This here is the worksheet portion from the APR. So these are the pictures that we'll be utilizing for our quiz if I don't do one live with holding up a bone. So you should know, again, the acromial end of the right clavicle. So in this case, this is our acromial end. We already know it's the right clavicle, and then this will be our sternal end. So check, check. The acromial end of the right scapula. Let me just color this one. It's going to be here. You can also see that right up here, or you can see it right there. Those would be the acromial ends. Let me change color. The glenoid fossa of the right scapula, it's going to be this surface here. The subscapular fossa, I'll go back to the orange, is going to be only on this anterior view. It's on the part that's actually pressed against the body. So you wouldn't see it if it was actually on a skeleton because it's right against the ribs. So that is the subscapular fossa, and how you write it would be of the right scapula. Then we have, let me switch over here, go to red, our inferior angle. So I usually will put a little number here. I might say like number 4 or whatever the test number is. And so, you know, that's the inferior angle. And then we'll do spine of the right scapula. You can see that in this here. That's this here, check. And then we know we have the medial border is going to be on this side, and then this one is our lateral border. Okay. Now I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to skip ahead, and we're going to go, whoops, discard. I'm going to go to the girdles. So now we have to skip past the arm, because we'll do the arm at the next one. And then we're going to go to part 3, where it says pelvic girdle. So let me go back to, I found it on my side, so you guys can search for it in your notes, and I'll post it here. So it should be pelvic girdle. It should be right after the arm, and this is what we're looking for. So hopefully everyone's got it. Let me move some of these bones out of my way, so I don't put them on top of each other. So I'm super, super picky about the bones in my lab, our lab, I should say our, for students as well as the other teachers. When I got here, I first started teaching at Yavapai in 2001. All of the bones were in these big drawers, and every time you'd open or close the drawers, the bones are jumbling together. It was horrible. So that's why most of them are damaged, because they've been damaged, just their storage was terrible. So I've got them all wrapped up. But then some of my colleagues would make fun of me for being so protective of the bones until I went up to NAU. Then I really thought, gosh, I really am the bone Nazi lady, because they put their bones in a giant pile. It was so sad, because these are real human bones, and you're really not getting them from that's how we say legitimate sources anymore these days. So these are, although questionable, probably have questionable history, they are to be preserved. So I've got these, so I'm a little bit picky. So I've got everything rounded up and wrapped up, and I sort of drive my colleagues crazy about it. So this is the pelvic girdle we're going on with. So this is the lab guide list if you want to kind of follow along, check off, but we'll also go through this at the end of this and make sure we're comfortable with all of these features. There's a lot to it on this one. So we're starting the inferior appendicular skeleton. We'll do the lower extremity next time. So we're just dealing with this part. So this is kind of our ossa coxa. Ossa coxa is, like people like to call it, our hip bone. Our hip bone is actually made of 3 bones. Now I'm holding this up, you're like, I see 1 bone. So I'm only hanging one of them up here. It seems like 1 bone. Embryologically though, it was 3 different bones. And no, none of ours are colored really all the way. I don't like them colored, but any markings on them were done before my time, again, which was a long time ago. So it's technically made up of 3 bones. So but although it looks like 1 bone. So the bone at the top, this flared part that looks like a fan, is the ilium. This bottom thicker part that everyone's sitting on is your ischium. And then this part that's pointing towards your midline is the pubis. So the 3 bones: ilium, the fan; ischium, the butt part that you're sitting on; and then your pubis, the part that's actually coming together, that's forming the front part of our pelvic girdle. So those are the 3. And in fact, this cup here, that's actually the socket, your hip socket, notice they drew in here this little sort of Mercedes symbol, if you will. And it's actually showing how the acetabulum, that's the cup or socket, is actually the center point for all 3. So part of the acetabulum is the ilium, part of the acetabulum is the ischium, and part of the acetabulum is the pubis. So it's all kind of coming together. So the acetabulum, the hip socket, it doesn't belong to one of any one, but we'll get through that. But I wanted to, even though I'm talking about 3, I wanted to go, yeah, actually, physically it's 1, but technically that you're going to write it out is 3. So back to the shared screen. Okay, here we go. All right, so ossa coxa, the flared fan part, that's the part that, you know, we're going to hang on to. That's going to be up for our purposes now. Technically it's not 100% up, it's like up and back, but we'll hold it as it's up. And then the hip socket part, obviously it's lateral, it's got to be poking out because that's going to be the socket for your leg to come in. And then on the back side of the fan is the rough part and the pointy part. Okay, let me point this. So this is a better picture that highlights the 3 different bones. So this here is obviously the socket. So this here is the lateral. And then this part here, and then this is the part you're sitting on, this is posterior. So if this here is lateral, this side, and this here is the back side, this one would be the right one. I'll stop sharing and show you what I'm holding. So if I have this one here, notice that we have the fan. So of the fan, we have the socket. So then I'll stand up. I actually have dirty pants on. So they're not quite sweats. I should have worn different clothes if I knew I was going to stand up. I should know better than that. So I like to stand in class and then I say, okay, here's the hip socket, and it sticks out. And we have this bottom part that we're going to sit on. Now on the fan, it's smooth on one side, and notice it's smooth here, but then it gets rough. This rough part is what's going to, these guys don't match, where the sacrum hooks up to. That's the rough part. So we know that's on the inside. So this guy, it's going to be my left. See how it doesn't really make sense on this side. We don't want the hole going back to my butt. This hole is going to be facing forward. So when we hold this guy up, we have the socket and where our butt goes. So this is actually how it sits in our body. Okay, I'm going to go back to the share screen. So of the ilium, which is going to be our big fan part here, we have, erase this, I hope I have this numbered automatically. Yes, the iliac crest is the upper fan part. So if you're going to stand up and put your hands on your hips, it is your hands are resting on the iliac crest. Then if you were to start with your hands on your hips and then you move them forward to the very front pointy part. So again, I'm going to stop. So if you have your hands on your hips, it's on the iliac crest. And then you move your hands forward. So the front point of your hip bones, that is going to be your anterior superior iliac spine. You can feel those better if you're just laying down and you're laying back. That would be the part. And so where that is, hopefully it's, there we go. So this is your anterior superior iliac spine. And then you wouldn't feel this, but this is, so you could palpate your own iliac crest. You can palpate your own anterior superior iliac spine because that's the point, front point of your hip. Then right below it, so if you're to, I always tell students, okay, when we're holding the bones, drop it down, and then this next little shelf down below it is going to be your anterior inferior iliac spine. And the spine just means this ridge line, really, that's it. A crest is just a more prominent ridge line. A spine is like a minor crest. Then we have the same thing on the back side. The posterior superior, so it's literally like if you're running your finger down your hip, where it's going to end. So the last sort of ledge before it drops off is going to be the posterior superior iliac spine. And then obviously there's a lower lip down here. That would be the posterior inferior. So again, we have, they match the front and back. They have really long names, but hopefully they just make sense where they are. They sort of are self-explanatory. And then we have this thing known as the greater sciatic notch. That's that whole thing. And then the iliac fossa is the other side. So this picture, we see our acetabulum, that's the hip socket. We see the butt bone that we're sitting on, that we haven't done that one yet. This one's heading towards the pubis. So this one here happens to be our right side. But if we were to see the iliac fossa, let me see if I have a different picture. Okay, the iliac fossa is this whole surface on the inside. It forms the inner bowl of our pelvis. So from this picture here, we'll recap. Our iliac crest is this upper area that you rest your hands on your hip. The front point, anterior superior iliac spine. Then we drop down to the anterior inferior iliac spine. Or if we were going along the crest at the very back point before we drop off, posterior superior iliac spine and the posterior inferior iliac spine. Oops, sorry, move my control panel. And then we have our greater sciatic notch. And then the inner basin here, the bowl, is our iliac fossa. So we'll do that really quick on this guy here. So of our here, so this here we have our acetabulum. So we have this pointing forward. This is going to be our pubis. So we know this is our anterior side. So if I rotate it, we have iliac crest, anterior superior iliac spine, and we just drop anterior inferior iliac spine. Back up to the crest, we run our finger to right before we drop off. This here is our posterior superior iliac spine, and then see how it hooks down. And then now we're at the posterior inferior iliac spine. And then this whole thing here, this giant loop here, that is the greater sciatic notch. And then we turn this baby around, and this whole basin here is our iliac fossa. back to the screen share. The ischium, if we crudely like to call that one our butt bone. The butt bone is going to be this bottom, oops, come on pen, is down there. That's what we're sitting on. So let's get rid of this. So we have our ischial spine, I'm pretty sure I have this numbered. Ischial spine, lesser sciatic notch. You're sitting on the ischial tuberosity, and then the ischial ramus actually only goes halfway, and it sticks up here. It makes the bottom half of that the thing that makes a circle, it's there. So let me erase this. I'm pretty sure this one has the numbers. So we have, that's the boundary of the ischium. Okay. Ischial spine, actually it comes down and terminates through here. So there we go. But the point is really the spine. Lesser sciatic notch, that would be this curved part. Ischial tuberosity, that's what if you're sitting on hard bleachers for a long time, and that's the part that starts to go numb, because it's your ischial tuberosity is the point of your butt bone sitting down. And then your ischial ramus is only this sort of inferior half of this sort of beam of bone there. So we'll see it on this guy here. So here we are. This whole, I have another slide where it actually names this as the acetabulum, and this here is our obturator foramen. So we'll get up to that. I didn't want to. So if we have our ilium that I'm hanging on to, this one has a super prominent ischial spine here. So we have our ischial spine, lesser sciatic notch, ischial tuberosity. That's probably the most important feature of this bone. It's probably the one I favor the most when I write test questions. Like, you are sitting on your what? Ischial tuberosity of the ischium. This gets super redundant. Do not be afraid to be redundant. I'd rather you be complete. So ischial tuberosity of the right or left ischium. And then inferior ramus, right where I'm pointing here. Okay, up to the share. Okay, the pubis, the last part here, pretty easy. A ramus just means a beam of bone, like, so this whole thing's a ramus. But because half of it is ischium, then this other part here is going to be the pubis that we're dealing with right now. So easy peasy, superior ramus, inferior ramus of the pubis. Superior ramus, inferior ramus. And then the acetabulum, that's the hip socket. Obturator foramen is this hole that's formed by these two bones. Symphysis pubis is actually where you have, let me get my skeleton man here. The symphysis pubis is actually where the two comes together. So you have the two sides. So the two ossa coxa, we can see two obturator foramen. Those are the two holes. And actually in this little guy here, you can actually see it from the front. I've had something more colored that you can see that I'm pointing to. I'll use my pencil. So down here is the ischial tuberosity. That's the lowest part. That's the butt bone that you're going to sit on. Obturator foramen is where the pen's coming out. That's made by these two bones. And the symphysis pubis is actually the connector between the two. So we can kind of recap on skeleton guy here. And we have our iliac crest of the right ilium, or our iliac crest of the left ilium. We have the iliac fossa, that's this inner portion. It's the smooth that makes the bowl. Then if we turn them around, go sideways, we can obviously see the anterior superior iliac spine or the anterior inferior iliac spine. Back to the crest, we go back till I feel like I'm about to fall off. Posterior superior iliac spine, drop down to posterior inferior iliac spine, and then greater sciatic notch. And all these are of the ilium, in this case of the right ilium. Then we go to the ischial spine of the ischium, lesser sciatic notch of the ischium, And most importantly, your ischial tuberosity of the ischium, again, of the right ischium, to be redundant. But again, do not be afraid. I'd rather you have more words than less words. So that's where most people lose points, is not doing right or left and not sort of just assuming, oh, I already said ischium, I don't have to. Just say it all. It's that way. I'd rather be more complete. Okay, so those are all of them. And then we have, obviously, not all of them, that's the ischium. So then we have the ischium, and then notice this obturator foramen. It's got a whole ramus, but technically, embryologically, there was a line between the two. And may have that line in this one. No, I don't. And so there was, you have the inferior ramus of the ischium. Sorry, yeah, you have the, let me make sure I'm doing it correctly so I'm consistent. Yeah, ischial ramus, sorry. Let me go back here. So we have the ischial ramus, it's the bottom of the ischium. Or if we do the front part here, the inferior ramus of the pubis. Let me get the big one. Ischial tuberosity is in bright red. The ischial ramus is right this part. The inferior ramus of the pubis is this part. That's kind of being more picky though. The main ones are your ischial tuberosity, that's an important one. Greater sciatic notch is a pretty obvious important one. We can palpate our anterior superior iliac spine. So I also tend to, on my list of priority as far as bony features go, higher on the list of priority are either things that you can palpate, like the iliac crest, you can feel it, so that, or things that really have important muscle attachments that we're going to talk about later when we get into the muscles. So as far as, so I really want you to know some of these landmarks for our surface body organization. Okay, let me go back to our screen share again. Oops, I'm out of this window. Got kind of sidetracked here. Okay, we're here, there. Okay, up. So acetabulum and obturator foramen, they're not of any one bone, they're of the pelvic girdle or of the ossa coxa. You can call one of these whole things an ossa coxa. This is an x-ray. So I like to show this to you because look at our obturator foramens. Instead of pointing forward when we hold, like I've been holding this ossa coxa, it is pointed more downward. It's tilted farther down than even our little skeleton man was showing you. So our pelvic basin, if we want to think of our pelvis as a bowl, is really halfway, way more than halfway tipped over. So it's pointed downward again. So it's just, and then we can see the symphysis pubis is right here, obturator foramen. The ischial tuberosities are back there. There's another ischial tuberosity. And you can really see the prominent posterior spine, iliac spine. Here's the inferior, greater sciatic notch. So I always like to show some of these x-ray images. I think I got that. What else do we have here? Oh yeah, so male versus female. Female is gonna be a lot bigger, obviously, because the baby's gonna go through it, perhaps. And the other important thing is a female, we already learned the sacrum is more flat and shallow, where in the male, it's really curved and arched. So curved that the coccyx is literally tucked in and is poking inward. And we have in the lab 2 pelvises together that you could see it more obviously. But just in general, we have a wider pelvic basin. We have the angle here below the symphysis pubis where these rami are really wide in a female versus the male. So this is probably the most obvious thing. If you're just looking at a pelvis and it's intact, you know, whether it's the basin is, you know, a young female where the basin hasn't spread out very much, this is probably the most obvious that you would see. And then look at the coccyx and the sacrum as they come in. I wonder if I have a picture. I don't. Okay. I should have put up, if I thought about it and realized I didn't have a very good picture of a male versus female besides that. So this is our list. Obviously, for the whole pelvic girdle, the whole shebang, you've got the sacrum back here, and you have the little coccyx sticking down right there. It's just part of what makes the entire basin. And then obviously we did the 2 ossa coxa. There's 1 and 2 on either side. So you put them all together. That's how we attach this pelvic girdle to our axial skeleton, where the sacrum is our axial skeleton. On the ossa coxa itself, we have this lower part, which is the ischium. We have the fan part, which is the ilium. And then we have this front portion here that's going to be the pubis. So those are the 3 bones of the ossa coxa. When we do the ischium, we sit on the ischial tuberosity. We have this little minor little cup, that's our lesser sciatic notch. And then we have our ischial spine, that's going to be this little point. Let me erase this so you can kind of see the point a lot easier. And then the ischial ramus is going to be this portion here. So you can see it's a little darker on the ischial side. And we'll go to the ilium. That's the fan. Iliac fossa, you can see on this upper slide because that's the basin. Let me erase this part. Then the iliac crest is obviously the hip bone that you're going to put your hands on your hip. They would rest there on your iliac crest. The greater sciatic notch is this large, obvious hook there. And then the last 4 features are really the anterior superior spine and the anterior inferior. We're doing posterior superior and posterior inferior. So those would be the last sort of 4 features that you have there. And erase this. Finally, for the pubis, superior ramus makes this top part, and the inferior ramus makes the upper portion of that part. And then we have our obturator foramen there, which is the hole, and the acetabulum, which is the socket. And for our APR images, we'll go through, oh, hello, spelling mistake. Ilium, okay. I found quite a number of my spelling mistakes on here. I just missed that one. So yeah, the worksheets, bad on me on bad spelling mistakes. Ilium, obviously, is we're going to find the ilium. That's going to be this bone or this bone, the ischium and the pubis. So you should just in general be aware that there are 3 different bones. That sets you up for being able to name the rest of the features. So ischial tuberosity of the right ischium, it's just letting you know these guys down here are both going to be right. That's this part or this part. So this is the lateral side. You can see it because of the acetabulum, and this is the medial side because you don't see the acetabulum. Okay, and there's the acetabulum. That's our socket. That doesn't have to be of any bone because it's really made up of all 3 bones. If you really want to get fancy and be consistent, you could say acetabulum of the right ossa coxa. Greater sciatic notch of the right ilium would be this area, this area. The lesser sciatic notch of the right ischium. So again, it's a different bone. Here we go. You can see that there, and we can kind of start to see it there from this view, but not so much. So you really see it better on this medial view. The ischial spine of the ischium, right ischium. Oh, sorry. Goodness gracious. There we go. I used to go in the other order. And then, oh, spelling mistake again. Ramus. Okay. The ischial ramus is right here or right here. Again, it doesn't go the whole way, it's just halfway. Iliac crest of the left ilium is up here. And then the iliac fossa of the right ilium is going to be here. So again, sometimes if I have you identify something, you're pointing it out, be clear on right and left. Or if you're writing it, be very clear on right and left. The anterior superior iliac spine of the right ilium. Again, we have this guy here, or it's there. That's that part. Maybe I'll do some different colors here. Do green next. Anterior inferior. That would be this guy. And let's switch colors again. Posterior, superior, oh, it's right there. I don't know why I didn't put posterior, inferior, but okay. Superior ramus of the right pubis, is this part. And this would be this part here as well. That's the superior ramus. Inferior ramus, I'll just put an I. Inferior here, you can actually see it here or here. Inferior. And the obturator foramen, you can actually see the ligaments through there, but this is the obturator foramen. Circle here. That's the obturator foramen. Okie doke. And that's it. So I made you go brutal last time. This time it's easy. So we can, yes, that's all we got. Any questions? Yay! No, sorry about the last time. That was a little tough. Okay, so then the next time I see you, it'll be longer than this because we're going to do the arm. Well, it's not quite that bad, but we'll be doing the humerus, the radius, the ulna. We'll do the wrist and the hand. We'll do the femur, the tibia, fibula, the ankle, and the foot. So we'll be doing that. So probably there'll be more bones, and so it'll be a little bit longer, but we'll put those all together so you can kind of get the parallels a little bit. So there's a lot of similar features, but we can kind of go through them together that way. And plus it'll give you time to sort of synthesize where we've gone. Yes, Julie.
I just had a clarification. I was doing the quizzes and I was noticing I was getting them wrong because I put the side, I did the feature and then right or left of the bone. And it wanted the right or left feature and then the bone name.
It depends. So
Okay.
if we have two scapulas, then this would be like the glenoid cavity of the left scapula. So the bone would be left, but there's one glenoid cavity. If we're doing, say, mental foramen, but it's one mandible, but there's two holes here, then you would have, in this case, right mental foramen of the mandible. Okay. So right and left kind of depends on, it's usually right or left if they're by the bone, if you end up having two bones. So then you know which bone you're talking about. But if it's a kind of bone that we have that's like just one bone, you know, then the right or left would be in front of the feature if there's two features.
Okay, so, all right. I'll try to remember that.
More, yeah, so that's generally how they go with there. But that's also why I go through and correct them and double check that you've kind of identified. It's hard enough to identify right and left. That's the proper way, is whether there's two bones or there's two features. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions? All righty. So enjoy your early release, and I'll see you next class period.
Bye.
Bye.